Uttar Pradesh Chief Minister Yogi Adityanath likens the yoga asana of Surya Namaskar to the Muslim prayer ritual while addressing a gathering in Lucknow. The sale and registration of 7-year-old vehicles has been banned in India after the Supreme Court dismissed plea of car manufacturers. India's finance minister moves 4 GST bills in Parliament, calls it a revolutionary step. And British Prime Minister Theresa May triggers Article 50, starting the 2-year countdown to UK leaving the European Union. Good evening, you're watching India Prime. I am Sana Khan. After Donald Trump took over as the President of the United States, a spate of racist attacks in America caused concern across the world. In February this year, an Indian engineer was shot dead in a bar in Kansas. India was stunned. What's unfolding in India now seems no different. Only this time it is the Indians who have exposed their violent and racist side. What the recent incidents show is that perhaps Indians are an intolerant lot when it comes to African nationals. For a country rightly proud of its multiculturalism, in recent days, India seems to be coming up short. Earlier today, a young Kenyan national was brutally assaulted not far from India's capital, New Delhi. The second attack in as many days comes even as the local administration promised it was doing all that it could to ensure such attacks don't take place. What ails us? And are we looking at the wrong places for a solution? Let's talk more about this. Joining me in the studio right now is Ambassador Mahesh Sachdev. He is a former High Commissioner of India to Nigeria, also has been the ambassador to Algeria. Thank you, sir, so much for joining us here. GP Rajmohan, he joins me live from Kenya. He's an Indian businessman who's living in Africa for a while now. In the studio is WION's correspondent Inga Misleni. Thank you all for joining me this evening. Let's start by asking you, Mr. Rajmohan there. You're living in Kenya. Have you heard of these kind of, treatment being meted out to African nationals before this in India, or you think this is some sort of a new phenomena that is coming up to rise? Because statistics show this is certainly not the first time that this has happened. And do you, as an Indian national in Africa, feel safe?
Of course. I have been living in Kenya for more than 7 years. And before coming to Kenya, I was in Angola, that is western part of Africa. And recently I got an opportunity to visit Cameroon and Tanzania. So I have, actually Portuguese was Angola was a Portuguese colony, Kenya was a British colony. But even though it is located in different parts of Africa, the culture is same. They are respecting Indians. They don't have any kind of intolerance. They are open-minded. So I don't have any experience, a bad experience in Africa so far.
All right, sir, do stay with me. Ambassador Sachdev, in your experience, you've seen what's happening in India as far as African nationals are concerned. What's your take on this whole scenario?
I think these incidents are deplorable. At the same time, I would not go beyond taking them as episodic, and I would not like to draw generalizations from them.
But
they don't indicate.
In one case at least, the police has come out and said that this attack seems to be on the basis of the color of the skin. So there are indications that this is possibly a racist attack, and in such a situation we've had not just one but 3 now, if you include today's attack.
Yes, but for each of these incidents, there are thousands of Africans living side by side with their Indian hosts all the time. They study together, they do reasonably well, and they come here for treatment, they come here for education, holidaying, and business. And all that doesn't go reported.
Right.
It's
So you're
like-
saying
it's-
one is reading too much into the, the basis of these attacks. They, according to you, they're not racially motivated. Point taken. But Inga, you've traveled all the way from Africa to come and work in a country like India. Any fears when you look at these instances? What has your experience been like?
Well, Sana, to be honestly, when you hear something like this happening and you're an African that lives in India, especially in Noida, and this is happening in Greater Noida, you do feel the fear. Because first of all, they accused the 5 African guys that they overdosed their 12-year-old boy. And the people that were attacked, they were not the boys that were accused of drug dosing the 12-year-old boy, but rather different Africans who were going on about their business at the mall, shopping. And all of a sudden, a group of people started attacking them. And then what was the reason for the attack on the girl? Going to school in the morning, and she was just coming out of a cab, and then a group of people started to approach her, and then they beat her up. For me, in my view, yes, it does bring fear and questions on how safe am I exactly.
All right, that's a valid point. We have a report which we're going to play out in just a bit as well. But Mr. Raj Mohan, there are a lot of Africans who travel to India, be it for studies, higher education, or even medical tourism. That's a big industry in India, and a lot of Africans travel to the country to get treatment. Now, there have been reports earlier as well. I did a story myself about how there is, sometimes even neglect on the part of the doctors to treat these African nationals. They come under some programs. They claim not enough money is being paid to these private hospitals. Any these kind of stories that perhaps you're aware of or you could share with our viewers in terms of Africans traveling to India and being looked at differently?
Of course. There are some people who are coming there for tourism. They are doing some, especially from people coming from Nigeria. Of course, there are some problems. I also heard from India, but we cannot generalize things. Even in India, we can see different types of people who are not straightforward. So, because of those things, we cannot generalize things, and we cannot tell all Africans are like them.
All right. Anjan Sundaram, a journalist from Cambodia, is also, I believe, online with us at this point. Anjan, what we're talking about here is what's going wrong in India as far as the safety of Africans is concerned. There have been recent incidents which go on to show that Africans as nationals, as tourists, as students are perhaps not safe in the country. What's your take? What are the kind of reports that you're getting to hear about what's happening here?
So I'm not in India, and thank you for having me on the show, firstly. I'm not in India, so I'm not aware of the full extent, but I have heard instances of such sort of racist attacks or discrimination against Africans in India. It's in my understanding, it's not a new phenomenon.
All right. Anjan, do stay with me. I'm going to play out a report as well. There have been cases of, Anjan, coming back to you, of African nationals being mistreated, attacked in various countries. There have been leaders from, for instance, lawmakers in a country like Bangladesh who've made statements which, are very unlikely, unbecoming of a lawmaker, but they clearly go on to show that there is some sort of bias against discrimination that goes on as far as African nationals are concerned. If you could really point out some of the, perhaps instances in Cambodia in this regard?
I've done a lot of reporting in Africa, in Congo, in Rwanda, and in Central Africa, in the Central African Republic. And there are some Indian communities there. And the stark impression that I got in the way that Indian communities generally related to the African community is that the caste system which we have in India is still in place, and somehow Africans are integrated into that caste system and are placed at the bottom of it. So there is a relationship that Indians develop with African communities over there, but Indians tend to stick to themselves, tend to form close communities, to the point where in a place like Uganda, you don't have schools just for Indian kids. You have a school for the Gujarati kids, you have the school for the Punjabi kids, and each community has their own school
Right.
that is very particular about transmitting each community's values. And somehow African nationals or Congolese or Rwandans in the countries I was working in were treated in very much the way that I've seen sort of Indian society treat lower caste communities in India.
All right.
There is a parallel there.
All right. Thanks for providing us insight, Anjan Sundaram there, journalist who joins us from Cambodia at this point. Anjan, thanks so much for joining us for the moment. We'll, of course, go back to our guests over here in the studio as well as Mr. Raj Mohan in Kenya. But first up, a quick look at this report.
According to the 23-year-old Kenyan national who was attacked early Wednesday morning, a stone's throw away from India's glittering multicultural capital, New Delhi, her only crime was that she looked perhaps a little different from those who targeted her. The police claim it's a local law and order issue, but for her, it's a race crime. The recent spike in attacks against Africans in India has made national headlines, but only because of their utter barbarity. The crimes themselves are being treated as only another statistic. It's a number that should worry us. On Monday, a group of African nationals were attacked in the Delhi suburb of Noida by a mob that believed them to be involved in the death of an Indian youth. Later, the police confirmed that they were only targeted because of their skin color.
This is the point. African students are not safe. If you're an African, you have no right to fair hearing. If you're African, the whole legal system, the whole system is against you purely because you're black. We feel so horrible. In fact, we feel so scared to even move on the streets of this country because you don't know when the next attack will happen to you because you're so vulnerable.
Experts worry that young Africans are easy targets since the administration has done little by way of ensuring their safety. Attacks are treated as isolated incidents, with the local administration blaming miscreants. Then there is the proclivity to explain away race attacks. After all, India is not alone. Other Asian countries have similar problems.
In 2015, a Bangladeshi MP described his recent trip to Congo as a civilizing mission. He claimed that the Congolese hardly bathe and like to remain dirty. In 2007, the Chinese police targeted several Africans in Beijing, saying that they are cracking down on drugs. India is not alone in being racist, but it is perhaps alone in being the country that has done the least to address this issue.
India has invested billions in trade and grants in Africa in a bid to increase its sphere of influence in the continent. Last year, India courted African nations by inviting their leaders and signing a slew of trade agreements. However, attacks on Africans living in India could potentially cast a pall on the economic and diplomatic relations. Without acknowledging even a smidgen of racism, authorities can't hope to resolve the problem. Processes to better inform and integrate foreigners is a good place to start. Discussions on race and social attitudes must follow. But to begin with, we must admit to the reality of the ugly Indian. Bureau Report, WION.
All right, Mr. G.P. Rajmohan, coming to you. You're an Indian businessman in Africa. Now, there have been other attacks on Africans in recent months, and they're not just limited to Delhi alone. And for that reason, the situation got so intense last year that a business summit had to be, calling it a diplomatic crisis. They threatened to boycott the Africa Day celebrations. Do you see, looking at the kind of trade between the two countries, which runs into billions of US dollars, is also, poses a threat to that?
Actually, I want to give a background of Indians who are living here before coming to that point. Indians are here for generations, actually. And we have been given, this is actually a Christian-dominated country, and 87% of the population is Christian-based. And the Indians have been given enough space to construct temples wherever you want. And if you take a trade, the major portion of the trade is being done by the Indians only. Here, if you take one example, there is a big supermarket chain called Nakumat that is being run by the Indians. That is the biggest one here. I can give you a lot of examples.
Okay.
So far, even though the reports are known to all the Kenyans. Still, they are behaving in a polite way. They have not taken any kind of, revenge upon. Yeah, that is the situation. So I have not felt, I have been here for 12 years, I have not felt any kind of racism against us.
No, that is a point that we've raised before as well. But I'm saying that with what is happening, or the perception that is building up now in the country, the treatment that is meted out to African nationals, could that perhaps likely hit ties, cultural or economic, between the two countries? Not now, but if things continue to be like this, maybe in the days to come.
Of course, of course. Here, the people are educated. 87% of the people are educated. That means if you compare with Kenya, it is more educated.
That's what I wanted to ask you.
Yes,
Ambassador Sachdev, now, what is it? Let's say these are not racist attacks, but these are attacks on African nationals. What can the state do, the government do, to make sure that they're given the kind of security that is needed so that these kind of attacks don't take place?
I think a lot can be done. First of all, the incidents have to be put in their perspective. Secondly, they have to be investigated and rightful conclusions drawn. I think on both sides there are nuances to be undertaken. Indian government and Indian society need to introspect. On the other hand, Africans also need to introspect. There is an urgent need for them to weed out and isolate the criminal fringe that takes advantage of the openness of Indian society. It's not just a coincidence that they have an image problem. Please permit me to quote from Nigeria's president's interview to Telegraph newspaper of UK last month. He was asked, "Do you think that Nigerians have an image problem abroad?" His reply was, "Certainly, but we are on our way to salvage that. We would encourage our countrymen to stay at home, work hard, and make a respectable living at home."
Right.
So there is need to acknowledge that truth is more grainy than black and white.
Point taken, Ambassador Sachdev. Inga there, I'm sure, would like to add something to that. Inga, what do you have to say about the kind of security there and about the image that certain elements, when African nationals travel to other countries, the image that they bring with them?
Well, you cannot really say that, no, Africans are not criminals, and it's not true that maybe they were involved in regarding the situation in a drug problem. But it is quite difficult, though, when you're just being labeled as a prostitute, as a cannibal. I mean, just because something happened in a community. Yeah, we do have an image problem. It is a problem for us.
All right, Inga. This discussion could go on and on. It's a lengthy discussion, but we'll have to end it here. Thank you so much, Ambassador Sachdev, Mr. Raj Mohan, also my colleague Inga, for joining me here. So it seems that the problem is double-sided. There are two sides of this coin as well. Efforts need to be made from the Indian government side as well. Also, African nationals perhaps need to be a little more responsible, because they might have not done something, but the image that is attached to them, perhaps a lot more needed to get rid of that to better it. That's the takeaway from this discussion. We're going to be moving on right now to the